Right, so over 25 months after the fight was originally scheduled to take place, we are now finally close to seeing the return of Conor Benn when he could be taking on what is now a bitter rival in Chris Eubank Jr. We saw the two face off in the ring after Chris Eubank Jr.'s latest fight in Saudi Arabia. Last month, they had Neymar as the security just in case things got a little bit too tasty. And if Conor Benn's latest statement is anything to go by, then it could look like that fight is about to take place next. And I am going to quickly read you out a bit of the statement that was put out by Conor Benn, where he says, "I am thankful that after an incredibly challenging 2 years, the National Anti-Doping Panel has today finally cleared me of any wrongdoing. The past 24 months has been unquestionably the toughest of my life, a roller coaster period within which the WBC had already decided that I was innocent and the NADP decided in the first instant that there was no case to answer and that I was free to fight." Now, there is only one man that I want to discuss all of this news with and the return of Conor Benn to the ring, and that is my friend, the TrueGeordie. Brian, what's happening, bro?
All right, bro. I'm excited, man. I'm a bit of a Conor Benn fan, I would say. I was, especially when he was wrecking fools out here, just taking like that Van Heerden knockout. I think it was, that really blew me away. And he was like this little Mike Tyson. And I was really growing in support for him. And then it fucked his career. And I hope he can get it back on track. There is a bit of there's always going to be skepticism about this, because whenever you see cleared, well, whenever this has been talked about in, online and in the last couple of years, the evidence that we were looking for as fans of boxing was just missing. It was like, well, how is this proven innocent? And what we're just hearing is cleared. But I don't know if that's going to be enough for a lot of boxing fans to fully go back the way they were on Conor Benn. I think they're going to feel like they want more than that in order to be like, okay, well, we agree with the decision then, because even though they're not experts and potentially the people who've looked into it are like scientists or whatever, it's just been a lack of information for quite a while, and I do think that might be a bit problematic. But a couple of knockouts later, and that probably does go away. But what we can't ever again from him is another failed test. I think that would fuck his whole career up at that point. So I'm excited to see him back. Is it going to be Chris Eubank? He's calling out everyone. He is calling out a lot of people. And also, there's still talk about the British Boxing Board of Control and their relationship with Conor Benn, which has become extremely strained. Yeah. Will there be an appeal from UKAD? Probably not, from what we're hearing, but it's very complicated.
Well, this is the thing, right? We've heard there's VADA, there's UKAD, there's the National Anti-Doping Panel, there's the British Boxing Board of Control involved amidst all of this, right? So it's like, I did a video the other day on the channel, right? And it was about, in my opinion, the worst heavyweight champions of all time. And I had so many people in the comment section that were going, well, hold on, you didn't mention Lucas Brown and you didn't mention Trevor Bryan and this person, that person. And ultimately, the gist of what I'm getting at is there's so many belts and organisations involved that it's very hard to determine what is official, what's not, and what actually matters. And little did we know until this whole case erupted, it's actually very similar when it comes to testing agencies and when it comes to the enforcement of these testing agencies. So there's so many different almost people involved in this mix that it's very, very hard to know where we go from here. What we do know is at the minute, Conor Benn hasn't got a British Boxing Board of Control licence. Conor Benn does not need a British Boxing Board of Control licence. If the fight was to take place on a Riyadh season card, he could get a licence, hypothetically, from anywhere.
I'm not sure, though.
It wouldn't matter.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but from memory, I think they do use the British Boxing Board for the Riyadh season cards. And the risk is obviously if you're the other fighter, Eubank, and you take that fight under another banner. From what I know, they can be quite catty and like vengeful. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you want to go against them? It would be ideal for everyone involved if they would just let bygones be bygones and move on from it.
Well, they threatened to take away originally. So the plan was, right, at one point that the fight was still going to go ahead. It was supposed to go ahead in December. It was then going to go ahead in the February, right? And Eddie Hearn alluded on different interviews to the fact that obviously Conor Benn doesn't need a British Boxing Board of Control license for the fight to take place. I can think back to David Haye against Derek Chisora. They were licensed by the Luxembourg Boxing Board of Control. Dillian White, right? Not many people know this, but he actually had a Nevada license for a lot of his fights rather than British Boxing Board of Control license. So it can happen. And when you speak about Riyadh season cards, for example, like, you know, Bivol and Beterbiev, their licenses wouldn't have been commissioned by the British Boxing Board of Control. But I completely understand what you're saying, because there was the situation when this was going to happen, and they were saying that Conor Benn could just get another license. And what happened was apparently the British Boxing Board of Control turned around to Chris Eubank Jr. and said, we'll take your license away.
That's what I heard.
Do it. So it's a really messy situation, but surely it's a situation that now, 2 years on, you would imagine would finally be resolved. We see people that, you know, of being caught for stonewall breaches of the rules, like Jarrell Big Baby Miller, and serving a 2-year ban. Ryan Garcia, 12-month ban, you know.
But has he served the ban, though? Because he did fight within that period of time.
Did he? Did he fight, did he?
Exactly. So the British Boxing Board might be just looking at that going, you cheeky fucker, you know? And there may be a level of, you know, you've shown us disrespect here, and we don't take that lightly. But for me, I am keen to just see this put to bed, because for all... yes, he did get caught. As you've just rightly said, it wasn't Big Baby Miller levels of where he took the entire chemist. Was it possible that this was, you know, in his system? That was the weird thing for me, is how did it get into a system? That's never, ever been explained because of the kind of supplement it was, right? It's something that people traditionally take when they're coming off of a cycle, of a steroid cycle, where they're reawakening their own testicles. And that is not something that comes in other forms accidentally. By comparison, you know, some guys who have things in their protein shake or energy drink or whatever, where you look at it and go, oh, okay, that's kind of the Ryan Garcia, I think, excuse. That was the bit that I struggled with, and that is kind of the where the questioning comes into it, and that's where I'm like, well, how have you been found innocent then? Because simply saying we're innocent, like, I would prefer a little bit more of an explanation.
Well, there's a 600-odd page dossier, isn't there?
Fucking hell.
Where's the dossier?
A paragraph is what should be out there. You know what I mean?
I never saw the 600-page dossier come out. And obviously, as I say, we still haven't got the reason as to why. And to put it into perspective, right, this is another thing that, again, could be, I don't know if I want to call it an unfortunate coincidence, but it could just be a coincidence. But let's say, for example, me and you, we hit the gym together. We do it 5 times a week, right? And we're doing it for a year. All of a sudden, in November and December, we're doing the exact same workouts, we're lifting the exact same weights, and suddenly I get absolutely fucking jacked. What are you going to think? What are you going to think?
Well, this has been an accusation of him.
And when you look at his career path, there was always the explosiveness. Like, I think people like to rewrite history a little bit and make out, oh yeah, you know, it was only when Conor Benn was suspected of doing something that Conor Benn always had that explosive ferocity in the style of fighting. But the knockouts that we were speaking about, the stoppage of Samuel Vargas, you know, it was I think it was Chris Algieri that you were originally thinking of, where he just ices him on the ropes. Van Heerden that he beat after that. There was a run of fights where he looked like not only was he progressing massively and taking huge strides as a boxer in his ability, but also he had developed that punch power. And at the age he was at, you were kind kind of looking at it, and there was no reason to suspect anything. And you could put it down to the fact that between sort of 25 and 27, a lot of blokes will get their man strength, and Conor Benn could have got that around that time. But at the same time, when all this came to light, it's very, very easy to put 2 and 2 together, and you could be putting 2 and 2 together and getting the wrong number.
Yeah.
But
I am open-minded, to be fair to him. There was a point where I think he handled the interviews in the aftermath, Piers Morgan and the like. He handled them really badly, and I'm pretty sure he's aware of that now. And I think that he maybe made himself look more guilty than he even needed to, because he was so aggressive in the way he was communicating. And he's a young guy, right? So, like, I get it. You're passionate. He's his dad's son, right? That's very clear. But I am open-minded that he could be innocent. I just think that the explanation, is strange, and that we haven't really had one as to how that happened. But I'll be honest, for the sake of the lad's career, I am willing to just sort of, say, right, look, whatever happened, right? Yep. It wasn't like he was caught with the whole chemist in his body. It could have been an honest mistake. It might have been a deliberate mistake. Regardless, I think as a young guy, I'm willing to look at that and go, mistakes happen. Let's just move forward with him. Give him his fucking career back. And if he ever makes a mistake again, throw the book at him. Absolutely, because then lightning doesn't strike twice. But I think it's fair to let him crack on now. And I do hope they do that, because there's so many exciting fights we could make with Conor Benn. And he is a fucking great fighter to watch. He's great personality. He's exactly what we want in boxing. Whether or not it is the Eubank fight, which would be legacy defining for Chris Eubank Jr. especially, I actually don't think it's as legacy defining for Conor, because he is younger and a lot younger, and there's so many different things he could still achieve in his career with or without a win. If Chris Eubank Jr. loses that fight, his career, it's a whole different look to it. For me, it's a career of failure. It's a career of the nearly man, and when he got to certain levels, he always fucked it, and especially to lose to the smaller guy, especially when his father had a win and a draw, I believe, against Nigel Benn. You can't let the family down. And if you do that after his dad has said all these things in the last 12 to 18 months about him being he didn't say charlatan, but he certainly didn't defend his son. If his son was to let the family down, that's the narrative immediately. It really puts a bad stain on the entire Eubank career, whereas I don't think it does for Conor. I think Conor Benn has a lot less to lose in that fight. Outside of that fight, what do you like? Because he's called out a lot of fighters. Devin Haney, Javon Davis. Devin probably a similar size to him. Javon definitely smaller. A couple of others as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I would be interested in myself would be Ryan Garcia. The problem is,
wow, that would be a banging fight.
That'd be unreal, and
you know how they'd market it as well. But the internet would call it Battle of the fucking Drugs Cheats, wouldn't they? The internet would get crazy.
Just let them both do what they want, to be honest.
But it'd be a great fight to watch in all seriousness.
Yeah, and the build-up would be electrifying for that one.
God, I'd love that too.
The problem is, like, we're hearing murmurs now. I've heard a couple of different people within the industry, and sometimes you'll listen to something, and having been around these events, and sometimes the people that are talking stuff like that, you'll start to read between the lines a little bit. And even Gareth A. Davis, I heard him talking on an interview the other day, and he said we need to remember that Conor Benn's been out of the ring for a long time, so that he probably wouldn't jump straight back into the fight, and there would be but I'm thinking, well, hold on. Conor Benn literally said on camera, and I understand there's an element of, just hyping up the fight and whatnot, but you literally said on camera that this would be your warm-up fight. And then off the back of that, bless him, I love Gareth, right? But off the back of that, he suggested a good warm-up fight for Conor Benn would be David Avanesian. David Avanesian, right? He might have been stopped by Boots Ennis, and he might have been stopped by Terence Crawford, but look at what he did to Josh Kelly. And at that date in his career, Josh Kelly had done more in boxing at that point than Conor Benn had. He had been to the Olympics, and he had fought more top level or higher level. He fought well against Crawford
as well. He put a good fucking fight up against Crawford. That is not a warm-up fight.
So in terms of a warm-up fight, that would be horrific.
I don't want to see a warm-up fight, mate.
No. When I look at Conor Benn's resume so far, this is the awkward thing about not going a traditional route of, you know, English title, British title, European level. When you go the intercontinental belts and stuff like that, it can be good because it can maneuver you into a better position ultimately when it comes to getting yourself a world title shot. But at the same time as doing that, you can miss out so many levels that you don't really know where you're at. And I've had a look at Conor Benn's resume, right? And there are names on Conor Benn's resume, like Chris Eubank, who you go, well, that's a good win. But you've always got to look at the context of where they are in their career at that moment in time. Is that a prime version? And is that a version that's there for a payday? Or is that a version that's come to win? And the best name I would say on Conor Benn's resume at the moment is Sebastian Formella. Now, Sebastian Formella, the fight before he fought Conor Benn, went to the distance with Sean Porter, right? And it wasn't a prime Sean Porter, but it was also a Sean Porter not far off the back of the Errol Spence fight.
Sean Porter. You know what I mean?
It's Sean Porter. Sean Porter. And Conor Benn schooled Sebastian Formella, more or less. He gave him a bit of a boxing lesson and beat him up a bit, went the distance with him, so it's a good win. So there's where I can sort of gauge where we're at. But realistically, I think that what Turki Al-Sheikh and the guys at Riyadh Season absolutely love to do is they love to give the fans what they want. And I do not think that they would get the boys in the ring together, have that face-off, have that interaction, make sure that Conor Benn was there during fight week for that fight, and not do that with the intention to immediately make that fight next. So that's the one I'd want to
Have you heard the rumour date as well?
Is it February?
It's the undercard of Dubois, potentially Dubois Parker. So imagine Eubank Benn, Dubois Parker on one fucking card. That is,
There's only one more fight to add on to that one. If you can have Ben Whittaker against Liam Cameron in the rematch.
I would love that.
One. Could you imagine?
Yes, my guy. And do you know what? There's one thing that you've just mentioned there that's really got my head going because it was mentioned this week. Oscar De La Hoya versus Eddie Hearn, 5 versus 5. And to have Ryan Garcia versus Conor Benn topping the bill of that would be fucking money. I would love to see that because Garcia and Hearn, that's a 5v5 that would get the juices going even more than Frank Warren versus Eddie. Eddie and Frank are very friendly. I want the real hatred from these two, as managers of their football teams almost. I'd love to see that.
Stylistically, when we mentioned those overseas names, right, and we spoke about Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Davis, obviously, look, the elephant in the room is that two of those guys are smaller guys. Like Devin Haney is
Devin's quite a big guy, though, isn't he? He does balloon. He balloons up by 20 pounds from 135. Like, I think he's one of the bigger guys at around that weight class. I don't think he would be that much smaller than Conor.
The problem is, though, with Devin Haney, sometimes it's not just about what you balloon up to and what you might walk around at. It's the weight of the guys that you're sparring, the weight of the guys that you're fighting. So say for Conor Benn, for example, he's now had 2 fights at light middleweight and he's done pretty much 80%, 90% of his career at welterweight. Whereas when you look, for example, at Devin Haney hasn't, in a professional boxing ring, took a punch off a man heavier than 135 pounds, I think.
143 was Ryan Garcia when they weren't together.
And how did that go?
It didn't go great. Do you know what's funny? I've been watching. I don't know if you've seen that. Is it Box Talk or the boxing channel with Malik Nagi? And
I've seen clips, yeah.
Malik Nagi's going in on Ryan Garcia, being like, he's always been on steroids, and he goes, if he never had steroids, he wouldn't have his speed and power. I'm like, now come on. Like, I know you might not like this kid, but to say he would have never been, even when he was skinny as fuck or whatever, when he was a little kid, that kid has the fastest hands naturally in maybe all of boxing. And you're acting like you just took some gear and all of a sudden you can throw hands like that. bullshit. I don't know why I had to come out with that, but just listening to him lately, I've been like, and I like Malik Nagi. In fact, he's one of the best analysts sometimes to listen to, but he really lets his heart rule his head sometimes. And I'd be interested in the Haney fight because Haney is going to move up anyway. I don't know if he wants to move up that far, but if there's one thing that is being made abundantly clear by Devin Haney, is he's a money fighter. He's in danger right now because now that he's taken that loss, the level of money he can command is significantly decreased. So he needs a dance partner, and there needs to be a level of like elite level feel to the boxing match. And Conor Benn versus him would be interesting because he's a technician. Ben is technically gifted, but he's a fighter, and he's going to commit. And it'd be interesting to see like how Haney handles the power of a Conor Benn and the ferocity of him after struggling with the speed of Ryan, because Ryan doesn't have that like overcommittal that Conor really overcommits sometimes, throws his whole body through punches, whereas Ryan can just throw from the hip and clip you and it's over. So what that would do is not necessarily test his reflexes in the way Ryan did. It would test the manhood of Devin Haney. Conor Benn is not a fighter who anyone's getting through the 12 rounds with where you're not having a bit of a gut check. And I'd like to see that from Devin Haney because that's where my real questions are about him as a fighter right now.
Yeah, the problem is with that, right, is you say it would be interesting to see how Devin Haney would handle the power and would handle the ferocity, but would he feel the power? Would he feel the ferocity? Because it's very easy to draw a conclusion from the Ryan Garcia fight and we'll go, well, Ryan Garcia did that to him. But I've just spoke about the fact that there is so much lack of middle ground in between the level that Ben has fought at and the level that he is calling people out at, right? So say, for example, with Ryan Garcia, by the time he's gone in there with Devin Haney, he's already been in there, albeit in defeat, with a guy that most people would acknowledge is above Devin Haney in Tank Garcia. I think most people feel that way, whether or not, you know, I've not got a horse in the race. I would back Tank in that fight. You know, Fortuna, Luke Campbell off the top of my head. Like, Ryan Garcia had been in with so many of the guys that were just in that middle ground of level between that and a Devin Haney, whereas with a Conor Benn, it's the ultimate jump all of a sudden. So it would be very hard for me to tell whether or not Conor Benn would be able to impose those tactics, be able to impose that natural maybe size advantage and the advantage of being able to fight at a bigger weight, or whether or not Devin Haney could just go in there and put a boxing lesson on him. Because let's be honest, we have seen it over time. That can happen in those fights. I think a stylistic matchup, the better one and the more exciting one, is a Ryan Garcia. Because I think a Ryan Garcia has shown throughout his career that he's way more willing to take risks. He's also more emotional, and I mean that inside of a ring as well, which I think that you can see that Conor Benn's an emotional fighter. I think stylistically that would gel, whereas I think that Devin Haney would have the ability to potentially navigate the tactics of Conor Benn and make it almost as boring a fight as you could have Conor Benn in, because I don't believe that Conor Benn is a fighter that can really be in a boring fight. But I think that Devin Haney would have the opportunity to do that, whereas Ryan Garcia, and as well with Ryan Garcia, like, we do see him as the naturally bigger man. He did ultimately sacrifice the fines to come in over the weight just to be able to fight Devin Haney. I just think that's more tasty. That one would.
I would much prefer that fight. It'd be a fucking shootout, wouldn't it? A shootout. Yeah. And Haney, but Haney's been in there with Lomachenko as well, right? So he's also got a bit of pedigree experience as well as the amateur background. So Conor Benn would be at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of skill, in terms of experience of being in there with skillful fighters to that level. But I think we're getting to a point outside of Gervonta Davis, who is really a disappointing fighter for me in terms of, I love watching him fight. I think he's a brilliant fighter. He's got everything. He's a real smart guy. But much like Floyd Mayweather, he navigates his career to a frustrating level. And I think he's
11 world champions, Gervonta Davis.
Yeah.
And And that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because how many of those fights, I'm not saying they haven't played out to be good fights afterwards, like the Cruz fight played out to be a good fight, but how many of those fights, when I say he's beat 11 world champions, how many were you actually excited for going into
That's exactly my point. And I think he goes in there having really studied his opponent, and credit to him for that, right? But that's why he takes the fight, because he studied them to such a degree where he goes, the risk reward here is massively in my favor. And he hence why he weight trained the fuck down to Ryan Garcia, right? He made sure I boiled him right down, and he doesn't want to take those risks. So I feel like calling out Javon for Conor Benn and the size Conor Benn is. Javon ain't ever taken that fight. No. I'd be surprised if Javon Davis ever steps foot on Saudi soil. I will be shocked, because that is the proving ground in boxing right now, and I don't think he has any interest in proving anything. He just wants to pad his bank balance and make sure, as this undefeated fighter, he can always keep making a certain amount of money and not risk it, because once you risk it, if you fail, and unfortunately this is boxing, you do have to take a step down in money. So he's not interested in that. So I do think that if you're wanting big money fights, which clearly Conor Benn and Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney are all about, their fighters, whether or not the weights match or whatever, because they're all at different weights, I don't think that matters. No. I think after the Chris Eubank fight, if we get that, I want to see them all.
Well, let's speak about the Chris Eubank fight if we get in that next. When that fight was originally made, I saw it as a fun fight. I saw it as a fight that I was interested. Well, I was interested. I had a ticket. I was supposed to be going. I was looking forward to the fight, but did I see it as a hugely competitive fight? I don't know if I did at the time. Chris Eubank Jr. was coming off the back of a really dominant performance against Liam Williams at the time, right? Now, Liam Williams had been beaten unbeaten fighters in the build-up in his sort of run towards that, and before he went in with Chris Eubank Jr., he had gone the distance with Demetrius Andrade, and it was very wide on the scorecards in that fight, but I didn't actually think it was as wide as it deserved to be. The right man won, but what I'm saying is Liam Williams had put in a good performance against a good guy at world level, and therefore I kind of looked at it and I thought, right, we're going to learn a lot about Chris Eubank Jr. here, because this is one of the best opponents that he's fought in quite a long time that is actually on a hot run of form, probably since he fought George Groves, right? And Chris Eubank Jr. had Liam Williams bouncing up and down off the canvas like a yo-yo. I think he dropped him 4 or 5 times in that fight, right? Then the Conor Benn fight gets signed. And as much as Conor Benn's been looking explosive and that sort of thing at the time, ultimately, you're looking at a guy in Chris Eubank Jr. that took George Groves' best shots, been in there with an Arthur Abraham, a faded James DeGale who should have never been in a boxing ring, but still a James DeGale. So had mixed not only a higher level, a much heavier weight than Conor Benn. And I was looking at it, and I didn't want to use the word gimmick fight, but you could be excused for using it, right? My perception now is that fight is a lot closer off the back of seeing a slight deterioration in Chris Eubank Jr., I believe. I think that he had a career worst performance possibly against Liam Smith. He then came next time in with a career best performance against Liam Smith. And last time out against Serez Mata, I thought that he looked good, but I think what it came down to was something I was probably wrong about in the build-up, whereas I thought this would be a competitive matchup. And actually, Serez Mata didn't look like a guy that was at the races at all. So now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, if Conor Benn can impose that explosive style upon Chris Eubank Jr., this now becomes way more of a competitive fight than I originally thought. Do you see it more competitive than it was when it was first made?
I was really on the Conor Benn hype train when it first was made, so I was kind of like, getting a bit carried away, I think, with what he was capable of. And I kind of hadn't been... I don't know. That Liam Williams fight was good, but I do think Liam Williams, despite that decent performance in the previous fight, I think it shows that he retired not long afterwards. I don't think I think he was at the tail end of his career. Literally, it proved he was. And sometimes you just need a fight to show you that.
He also got stopped, by the way, Liam Williams, in just one round by Hamza Shiraz. He went the distance, I think.
Exactly. And look, he went. Did he go the distance with Eubank, Liam Williams? I mean,
I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Eubank was having a lot of success with him, and then Eubank got an injury during that fight, and it stopped him from keeping the gas on, and he faded a little bit because of this hand injury that he picked up during the fight. Now, look, I think that the size advantage of Chris Eubank Jr. is something that has to be factored in, right? Because the bigger you are, the harder it is for a smaller guy to hurt you. Generally, yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but that's how general boxing works. So that explosive, powerful style of Conor Benn, it will not work quite as effectively, in theory, on a guy who was naturally bigger and, aside from that one performance where he got chinned, has generally shown a great chin throughout his whole career.
Yeah.
So, for me, then you're looking at, well, who's going to win a decision if it does go to a decision? Chris Eubank Jr. has got a good jab. He can move as well, like, all right. You know, I wouldn't say his feet are bad, although there was a couple of moments in that last fight where I thought, you look a little flat-footed for a second there. He does look like he slowed down ever so slightly. I'm not saying like a huge drop-off, but like naturally, what is he, 35? He isn't as quick as he was 5 years ago. So I think it's a close competitive fight, and that there's opportunities for both men to beat each other. I right now, if I had to put money on it, I think I would be leaning to Conor. I would be leaning to Chris Eubank if he hadn't have been knocked out in the last few fights. Because of the fact that he can stay at range, he can try and avoid them. And also, in Conor Benn's last fight against DAZN, there were moments where, he was dominant in that fight. I'm not taking anything away from him, but there were moments where he took one, and I thought, for fucking real, puncher hits you there. Because he did look a little bit hurt for a second. And Chris hasn't got knockout power. Like, he's not like... a one-punch knockout artist, rather. But he does have decent power. And for me, it's going to be really hard to call this. I would go 50-50 right now, actually, just because of the Chris Eubank knockout defeat.
You know that Dobson fight, I was watching it back, and I was noticing as well, like, when Conor Benn took the shot, I don't know whether I would draw the conclusion that it would hurt him, but he would always need to reset after taking that shot. And that little moment of when you reset, right? I know it in the gym from myself, right? These like sharp young amateurs, they're very good at timing that. When you need that reset, that's when they'll go ba-bum with another little flurry. Is Chris Eubank Jr. still of a athleticism to be able to do that? I'm not too sure, but one thing I do know,
that last fight, did he?
No.
There was a few moments where I thought, you can get him out of here now, and I felt like his body just wasn't where it used to be, because the older Chris Eubank, ironically younger Chris Eubank, I think would have gotten him out of there.
But I do also think that, like, you get people in the comment section that will say Eubank's never got any better, whatever. I think that two things can happen at the same time. I think that Eubank Jr. has deteriorated ever so slightly, but I do think his boxing ability and his fundamentals have got a lot better. I think his feet have got a little bit more well-timed. And one thing that I could very much see is him walking Conor Benn on to a lot of jabs. Now, I don't think these would be jabs that would necessarily hurt Conor Benn, by the way. I think there would be these quick flick jabs that he'd be able to walk him onto and time him with. But that's something that I do see possibly being able to happen in this fight.
You need to remember that, though, because in the fight against the Scouse lad, what was his...
Liam Smith.
Sorry. In the second fight, he used the jab loads, and he worked off of the jab. The first fight, when he got chinned, he didn't barely use it at all. He thought he was just on the trying to be clever on the back foot, in my opinion. And he boxed really well in that rematch, and credit to him. But in the Sarameta fight, I didn't feel like he used the jab quite enough. Like, I feel like he needs someone to tell him, this is a kid who's going to come and try and get on the inside. If he doesn't use his jab on this fight, he's asking for trouble.
But look at the evolution of Chris Eubank Jr., right? And it's funny because as much as they would both hate to admit it, these two have got so much more in common apart from just the fact that they're the son of legends than they would like to admit, right? And you look at the evolution of Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. came through with that ferocious style like Conor Benn. Chris Eubank Jr. came through looking like he wanted to get in there and hurt opponents, do damage to opponents. And I don't know what happened, and I can't pinpoint the exact time, and it might have been around the time when he stepped up and did finally taste defeat. It wasn't necessarily against Billy Joe Saunders. I think he came away from that one feeling like maybe if I had got going quicker, but I think the reality kind of hit home a little bit more after the defeat to George Groves. And now you see that Chris Eubank Jr. is happy to coast in fights. He is happy to work that jab, work the footwork, the odd occasional little moment of maybe a little bit of showmanship and showboating, and ultimately he's not always looking to take your chin off. And I think that because of the lack of that sort of depth in the middle of the fighters that he's been fighting and the fighters that he's projecting himself towards, Chris Eubank Jr.'s best served game plan in this fight would be to go in there and look for a points win against Conor Benn. And ultimately, being the bigger man, there's always that chance that you might clip him with something. But I think a Chris Eubank Jr. stoppage victory isn't one that I see as being all that likely in this fight. I believe that the most likely outcome at the moment would be a Chris Eubank Jr. points victory in a fight that has a lot of close competitive moments, and in a fight that potentially we could even see run back again.
The skewed data, before we finish up, mate, the skewed data for me is Chris Eubank has not fought a lot of fighters who've tried to take his fucking head off lately and had the quick feet and the explosiveness to actually do that. If that Chris Eubank we've just seen against Sheremetha, because I know he needed that warm-up and I accept that, had a fought Conor Benn that I've seen at his best, I would worry for him.
Yep.
Because I think he was really susceptible in that fight, and he wasn't in there with a live dog. So he's going to need to prepare for the fucking tornado of shit that's coming his way.
100%. I think it's a close fight. I think we're all looking forward to it. Obviously, whenever it happens, we're assuming it is going to be live and exclusive on DAZN, who, by the way, have now got Frank Warren's entire stable, Eddie Hearn's entire stable. They're taking over the game, so all the best fights are going to be there, and there's a link in the description to this video where you can sign up. If you sign up before the end of November, I think if you're in the UK, you get up to 33% off, and if you're in the US, it's up to 50% off. So definitely click down there. Brian's channel, The Pain Game, the best boxing channel on YouTube, is also linked in the description. Hopefully, if this one's in February in Saudi, we see ourselves packing our suitcases and getting out there again for it, because I'd be absolutely buzzing to be able to see this one live in the flesh. Thank you very, very much, mate, for joining me once again. I will see you all in the next one.